Hello, everyone. Good afternoon to all of you and to our honorable guests. Welcome to the day two of the inaugural European Research Days 2020 Australia and New Zealand, a flagship event of Euraxess Australia and New Zealand, organized in collaboration with the Delegation of European Union to Australia and the Delegation of European Union to New Zealand. My name is Nishant Sandile, and I'm the regional representative for Euraxess Australia and New Zealand. We are delighted to have so many of you register for this event. And for those who did not join us yesterday and have joined our event for the first time, Euraxess is an initiative of the European Commission that addresses barriers to the mobility of researchers and seeks to enhance scientific collaboration between Europe and the rest of the world. We provide free information about European research, career opportunities, international collaboration, and networking possibilities. Since all of you are watching this on your laptop or phone, I will encourage you to type Euraxess Australia and New Zealand on Twitter, LinkedIn, or Facebook and follow us there. Now, moving on to today's session, just to give you the running order, we will kick off the day with the first session, which is a high-level panel on promoting relations between EU and Australia. In an hour's time, we will move on to the highlight session for the day on study and research in Europe. And we will close this 3-hour day with a special session in collaboration with the European Research Council on applying for an ERC grant, perspective from grantees and evaluators. I'd like to encourage all of you to please use the question function in the Zoom interface to ask any question that you might have while our speakers are speaking. We will come back to take your questions towards the end of the session. Now, without further ado, please allow me to pass the platform to Mr. Jonas Hope, Advisor, Science, Research, Innovation, Technology and Education at the Delegation of European Union to Australia, who will be the moderator of the first session on promoting relations between EU and Australia. Over to you, Jonas.
Thank you very much, Nishant. Good afternoon to all, and thank you all for registering to join this event, the first such event being presented by Euraxess in Australia, for which we're very grateful. Thank you also to our high-level panel. We have a very distinguished high-level panel this afternoon to discuss and present their views on promoting relations between EU and Australia and the role of particularly the European Union's research and innovation programs in this. The high-level panel is Miss Anne McNaughton. She is the director of the Australian National University Centre for European Studies. We have Mr. Jason Collins, who is the CEO of the European Australian Business Council, and he's the chair of the European Business Organisations Worldwide panel. We have Professor Draper, who is the Executive Director for the Institute of International Trade at the University of Adelaide. And we have, last but not least, Professor Bruce Wilson. He's the Director of the EU Centre of Excellence Social and Global Studies Centre at RMIT University. We have to provide apologies today for the absence of Professor Anthony Elliott. He could not be with us. But what I thought I'd do was turn immediately to the business at hand and ask the general question, which all panel members will discuss, will answer in a 5 to 7 minutes session. What are the opportunities presented by the EU's science, research and innovation programs to your areas of work, particularly in relating to promoting relations between the EU and Australia? I'll ask Anne McNaughton to speak first, please. Anne.
Thank you, Jonas, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for this opportunity to participate in this particular panel. The work that we're looking at is particularly significant, and I'm very excited by the Horizon Europe proposal that is currently, hopefully, making its way successfully through the institutions in the EU. The opportunities, I think, for us in Australia and for us particularly here at the Centre for European Studies at the Australian National University and the university more broadly, numerous. We've got not only the opportunities for individual researchers to engage with colleagues from Europe in a multitude of disciplines, both in the STEM space, so the science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and in the arts and social sciences and humanities spaces. But the opportunities provided both through the Innovation Council, through Horizon 2020 as it's coming to a close, and hopefully Horizon Europe, as well as particularly the Jean Monnet activities through the Erasmus Plus program, all provide us with opportunities not only for Australian and regional researchers to collaborate with each other, but also to go across this divide regions really between Europe on the one hand and Australia and the Indo-Pacific on the other. I'm pleased to see that the proposal for Horizon Europe actually suggests some simplification in the application process and a little less of a burden with the bureaucracy and administration, because this is going to facilitate greater application, I think, and also free people up to get on with what they do best, which is their particular research. In our particular context at the Centre for European Studies, we have a number of Jean Monnet projects going forth at present, and these are well supported from the broader EU funding models, and we're delighted to be able to continue with that work, as well as collaborating not only with the colleagues, some of whom are here on the screen today, but also with our colleagues, as I've mentioned already, in Europe and the region. I'll just stop there and then ideally be able to contribute further to the discussion as it proceeds. Thanks, Jonas. Thanks, colleagues.
Oh, thank you, Anne. Thank you. Good of you to also mention all the components of the Horizon program that will be carried forward from Horizon 2020 through to Horizon Europe. I'll turn now to Mr. Jason Collins. Please, Jason, your views.
Well, thanks very much, Jonas, and to Nishant and the organisers for today. And it's great to be present for this discussion. I represent the European Australian Business Council, which is a peak body that brings together many of the business actors that are part of the dynamism that's reflected through the Australia-EU trade and investment relationship, which is very much a dynamic one and a growing one. And despite the conditions we're now faced with, still that relationship continues to grow in very positive ways. So our interest in this, as in some ways peak business councils have perhaps in Australia not been as active as they should be in terms of the research, science and innovation agenda, but we see it as really one of the most exciting aspects of how we can drive further collaboration, not just in research, science and innovation, but in terms of business flows, economic and industrial capacity, and in so many different other areas. So to colleagues perhaps on the call that may not realise, that is a relationship that if we include Europe as a geography, EU as well as UK and EFTA member states and candidate member countries, we're talking of a relationship of investment of over 1.2 trillion, about 100 billion in annual trade. It's a very large economic relationship between Australia and Europe. European companies are really embedded in all parts of the Australian economy and have been so for decades, indeed for over a century. Ericsson, the great Swedish telecoms ICT company, is celebrating its 130th year in Australia this year as an example, and there are many of them, of the presence of European companies and how they've been part of the development of the Australian economy from a long way back. We see across the different sectors, and this is only to name just a few, where there's, of course, research intensity in these particular sectors. Renewable energy, one of the areas that has been booming in Australia, and most of that has been European company-led. Clean hydrogen, firming and storage of electricity, generated by renewable sources like solar, hydro and wind, which I'm sure everyone on the call know about, but there's new areas, oceans, space, the agreement which has been signed between the Australian and the Italian space agencies is another example just recently. And that has real commercial interface. So that nexus between what happens in the research, science and innovation domains and what happens in terms of industrial capacity and economic opportunity are absolutely critical, that they're as joined at the hip as possible. Other areas, health and medical research, of course, agritech, smart cities, digital trade, cybersecurity, and advanced manufacturing. Now, all of these sectors have been spoken of a lot, particularly by the Australian federal government, as part of the economic recovery agenda. And again, all of these things, research, science and innovation, intensive sectors, and they're also sectors where Europe has global excellence and leadership in these. Of course, there is global leadership and excellence in Australia in many of these areas as well, particularly marine, if we look at environmental management and so on. But the more we can sort of create the architecture that allows more collaboration to flow, that's a very, very positive thing. That's not to say that isn't already happened. There is a very strong foundation. Australia was the first industrialised country to which the EU extended a treaty-level science and technology agreement, and that's since 1994. Australia has very actively participated in EU R&D or framework programs, despite not being a full member of that program, something that we're advocating strongly for Australia to take up. But it has been the fourth international non-eligible partner behind the US, China and Canada for Horizon 2020, the current framework program, which comes to an end at the end of this year, and then hopefully when Horizon Europe takes over from early in 2021. Australian organisations participated in over 300 programs under that framework, and the EU is now Australia's first partner when it comes to joint publications. So this has been possible through this close association at a university and academic, often at an academic to academic level. What we want to add into this is also business and industry as well. We know that the frameworks within Europe are in many countries highly evolved in terms of the structures, the programs and initiatives that bring collaboration, that make collaboration almost second nature. Between different research organisations, the companies that specialise in those areas and so forth. In fact, you see an enormous amount of mobility between people who are working in companies and then work in universities, work in research institutes and continually flow. I don't think we have that sort of same level of flow that happens so easily and as I said, almost second nature in many European countries. So we've been advocating together with the university sector here in Australia, principally for us with the group of 8, the body which coordinates a lot of action across the 8 major research universities in Australia, to say to the federal government, when the details of Horizon Europe are available, let's really go for it. There's sort of an enormous opportunity at hand. It's something which has the potential to lift everyone involved, companies, universities, researchers alike. It's all on the topics that I referred to before: clean energy, digital economy, all of the future-facing sectors that we have to get right. It means if we're collaborating, we're also thinking about all of the things around that affect those sectors. What are the regulatory frameworks? What are all those, the rules of the game and so on? If we're working closely together from the start, then we're likely to approach these problems in the same way, rather than sort of 10 years down the track go, oh, well, Australia's gone off and done that and Europe's doing it that way. Let's try and think of a mechanism, bring it together. It'd be great if we're actually thinking about all of those things right from the outset. So it's so I think an enormous amount of opportunity and excitement around this agenda. I think clearly the pandemic that we've all been facing and adapting to has underscored the critical role of science and research and innovation in terms of paving the way to recovery. So I think this is a great and timely conversations to being had, and look forward to seeing how BISCUS can play its role in our collective way forward on this. So thanks very much once again.
Thank you, Jason. And yes, I think it's important to underline the role in both the Australian economy and European Union economies of the investment in business, in research and innovation, because it's the majority proportion, notwithstanding the significant contribution of Horizon Europe through its planned €80 billion program, and similarly for Horizon 2020, the business spend exceeds that annually instead of over the 7 years. Look, I'll turn now to Professor Peter Draper, who is with us from the University of Adelaide. Peter, please, your views.
Thank you very much, Jonas. So we really work at the very complex interface between trade and development. Anyone who's worked on a modern trade agreement, for instance, recently the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement was just announced, will know that it covers a huge array of regulatory, institutional, market access, etc. domains, from goods to services to intellectual property rights, digital trade, and beyond. So we cover that entire gamut. We're very focused on those linkages between trade and development. It plays out across a range of policy terrains and institutional terrains. So we do a lot of work at the multilateral level, for instance, particularly the World Trade Organization, which faces very significant challenges, and within which the European Union is very closely engaged in trying to reform the institution. That offers a very direct connection for us into our various European relationships. We're also very interested in the policies and approaches of various major countries in the system, the US most obviously, but China, the European Union as an actor in that terrain as well. And we do a lot of work in the Indo-Pacific terrain, the various trade agreements, as I've mentioned, and all of this from an Australian perspective. We're particularly interested when it comes to Europe in the Australia-EU Free Trade Agreement, which we've been monitoring very closely and offers a variety of opportunities, as Jason has just referenced. And we've organised a range of dialogues on various topics connected to that. Turning specifically to today's topic, well, to go back a step, we get funding like the Centre for European Studies at ANU and other such centres, primarily from the Jean Monnet programme. So we're particularly interested in the EU's global orientations and emerging strategic thrusts and how that connects to the trade agenda and what that means for Australia-EU collaborations in particular. There are three particular emerging thrusts that we think are especially important. The first is, again, the interface between environment and sustainability, where there's a big emphasis in the current EU Commission on this interface. And of course, there will be, under a Biden administration, that is incoming. And that holds significant implications for Australia, from the very practical to renewable energy technologies and the future of those investments, and then, for instance, to the regulatory frameworks that will govern all of this in the future and will have to be negotiated, which is our particular interest. Those issues we will be taking up in our Jean Monnet funded Centre of Excellence next year, and running a series of dialogues around that trade, sustainability, environment interface. Similarly, secondly, actually, this an emerging EU global orientation, Jason already referenced this, is digital governance. And we have a Jean Monnet funded trade and investment and services network, which has a strong emphasis on digital trade governance in particular, from the multilateral level to the EU-Australia FTA to various regional negotiations and terrains as well. And then the third emerging global orientation that we see is the emphasis and the debate, I would say, within Europe on open strategic autonomy, which I think is still very much under definition, but as a response to the emerging geopolitical environment and will shape trade regulations at the global level going forward. For our part, we're particularly interested in an emerging debate, I would say, within the WTO that the EU is driving and that is on reforms to industrial subsidies at the global level. So we're building up some research in that area. We're creating a network around that, and we'd certainly hope to bring that into the European-Australia conversation. Turning to Horizon Europe, and linking that to these EU global orientations, as it currently stands, our primary interest as the Institute is in Pillar 2, which concerns global challenges, those 3 global challenges that I just outlined in particular. But it also emphasizes industrial competitiveness. And if one thinks about industrial subsidies, for instance, and reforms to industrial subsidies, that has big implications of the kinds of subsidies that could be paid in future, what kinds of activities could be subsidized, the rules under which that would occur as well. And all of that, I think, is very much in the frame for the foreseeable future. We're obviously part of the University of Adelaide, which has a much deeper set of interests in Horizon Europe, and I thought I should briefly mention some of those, not all, because the university does a lot, but there are several areas within Horizon Europe as currently framed that jumped out for me. The first is in the broadly defined health sciences area of research, with the University of Adelaide has a very strong track record and capabilities. Obviously in the space terrain, with South Australia hosting the Australian Space Agency, there's an emerging cluster of activities around that, subjects such as space law, for instance, that are really starting to take off now at the university. Obviously, the climate sustainability area is of great interest to the University of Adelaide. There's a variety of research activities around that. And then what I would describe as the broad cluster of food and agriculture referenced under Pillar 2, where there are strong capacities again in South Australia, at the University of Adelaide in particular. But of course, the university's interests go beyond just Pillar 2. There are strong foundational research capacities to correspond to Pillar 1, but also on Pillar 3 on innovation. Again, there is a Centre for Innovation here at the university and our business school, and again, a strong interest in that particular pillar. I'll leave it there, Jonas.
Well, thank you very much, Peter. Yes, it's, of course, you touched and alluded to the European Green Deal, which incorporates and tries to integrate a lot of those components into the activities of not just researchers, but also business. And there's 1 billion euros committed to that European Green Deal as the last funding round of Horizon 2020, with applications open till the 26th of January this year. May I turn now to Professor Bruce Wilson, the Director of the EU Centre of Excellence, Social and Global Studies Centre at RMIT University.
Thanks very much indeed, Jonas, and thanks to the colleagues for their comments. You've covered quite a bit of the ground to be mentioned. So just a couple of things, perhaps specifically about our university, RMIT, a large comprehensive university which has quite specific interests in Europe. So we have established a centre in Barcelona. It's a legal entity in Spain, and it's been an important part of the university's broader agenda of building partnerships. I think there's always an eye out for resources that underpins that kind of initiative. But as much as anything, the centre has proved to be a useful platform for bringing together potential partners and just building that first layer of collaboration between researchers. I think the other thing that I would add that's perhaps a bit different about RMIT as an applied university is that our focus is not just on partnerships with other researchers, but very much with the European Commission itself and with other industry partners. So if I talk specifically about our centre, we've got a range of projects that encompass trade, that encompass regional policy, regional and urban innovation, and in particular the United Nations global agenda, the Sustainable Development Goals, and the role that the EU plays in the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. And so that has led us specifically to the joint research centre within the European Commission, and we've been very pleased to cooperate with the JRC, particularly through its smart specialisation platform, which is based in Sevilla in Spain. But we have undertaken a number of activities jointly with the platform, and a number of projects that we have coalesced into projects that the smart specialisation platform has undertaken on behalf of the JRC, specifically with the United Nations, looking at the smart specialisation methodology and how it might contribute to the development of science, technology, innovation roadmaps that in turn contribute towards the achievement of the SDGs. That's been useful in turn because it has helped to point to different kinds of partnerships. The JRC has brought together a wide range of contributors, not only within Europe, but also other European partners in Mexico and Brazil and Thailand, for example. And so it's become quite an international conversation about the different kinds of contributions that different disciplines can make towards the achievement of the SDGs, as well as more direct examples of cooperation. There are other programs as well. I think some of the participants might well be interested in Horizon Europe as a fundamental initiative, but we've also had the privilege of taking part in the World Cities project, an initiative of the European Parliament, specifically focused on bringing together cities in Australia and Europe on various aspects of sustainable development. And we're looking forward to participating in a new initiative under the banner of the International Urban and Regional Cooperation Program that will include Australasia, Australia and New Zealand in its next iteration from 2021 onwards. So I think the point that I'd make is that whilst there are the headline programs that my colleagues have referred to, such as Horizon Europe and Erasmus, that we benefit from, there are other science, research, innovation initiatives that the European Commission sponsors and the Parliament that can be very beneficial platforms for collaboration.
Oh, thank you, Bruce. One thing you mentioned there was the JRC, and the JRC actually played a very important role in assisting with the monitoring and assessment of the bushfires that took place here in Australia, just starting about a year ago. And I think it was about a year ago that we were discussing this item at another Erasmus-funded exercise involving an exchange of personnel and expertise in relation to fire management. They came mostly from Spain, but they were hosted down at RMIT. And I think RMIT also has close associations there with the CRC for fire and natural resilience. Yes,
exactly.
Natural disasters. It's amazing how resilient disasters can be. If I was to now say thank you to all for, we're about halfway through our session, and ask for any response in terms of possible future synergies between your area of activity and the other areas that we have heard from today, and or anything that you think on the Australian or the European side should be a particular area of emphasis, or might be added to, or is perhaps currently missing in promoting science, research, and innovation for your particular area of specialization and work. If I turn to Anne McNaughton again, please.
Thank you, Jonas, and thank you. It was very interesting, again, getting an update on what everyone's working on. We're already working quite closely in different areas with different colleagues. Our colleague Hazel Moyer has been working with Peter Draper on a number of aspects, and we work closely with Bruce Wilson on some of our projects as well at the centre itself. One of the things I would say, particularly, I think, picking up on your last question, Jonas, is about the lack in Australia of really a national body that would support international collaboration. The concept is very well developed in Europe, and I must say, I think also at the national levels as well as at the EU level, whereas in Australia, we don't have the same sort of really deep and extended national funding body. We do have, yes, the ARC and the NHMRC, and I have seen one of the questions already that goes to that. But I think there is clearly more that could be done at the governmental level for support for international collaboration, notwithstanding what a challenge that can be. And it would, all we can do is really exhort government to look further at this, and not only at areas that are perhaps most immediately visible in terms of the business connections, important as they are, that have been mentioned, for example, in the comments that Jason made, and the trade matters that Peter has made, but also in the areas to do with mobility more broadly. Yes, we've got matters to do with healthcare. We've seen in the current COVID crisis, both here in Australia and globally, the issues around the elderly, young, vulnerable. These people need care as well as particular support, and the research that is currently being undertaken both here at the ANU and at the other institutions represented here today goes to that, but I suggest that's going to have to escalate, and that's picked up in the pillars that are outlined in Horizon Europe. So certainly greater support. We can never have enough support from the government here. The support that we do get from the EU is very welcome. And Jason, we can only, endorse what you've been saying about encouraging further collaboration with industry as well. There's always room for improvement. There's always scope for greater collaboration and cooperation. But the centres in Australia work already very well with each other across quite a large continent to maintain relations, as we do with our colleagues in New Zealand and in the Asia Pacific and Indo-Pacific region. I might just stop there. There's some other things that have come up, but I'll leave those for later discussion about students and encouraging early career researchers and how we can manage those sorts of networks and relations. But I'll pause there now, Jonas, so that the others have a chance to say a few words as well on your last questions.
Oh, thank you very much, Anne. And I might just point to our next session, which is session 5, which will cover particularly the opportunities available under the Marie Sklodowska-Curie actions in Horizon Europe as they're planned, to which you've alluded. So I'll turn now to Mr. Jason Collins. And how do you see the opportunities for synergies or the elements that need to be added to or are possibly missing, or should be strengthened for opportunities for collaboration under Horizon Europe?
Thanks very much, Jonas. Just a few more comments, and I'm conscious that there are many people on this call that will be far more expert in a number of these topics than I am, but just some observations. I mean, it's clear that there are many countries around the world, in particular in Europe, who are the same size or actually much smaller than Australia in terms of whether it be population, certainly geographically, but in terms of population in particular, yet remain ahead of the curve in terms of their both economic as well as their social, and they're obviously linked, standards and the industries and the sectors which they are globally leading in. And it's no surprise that they're also some of the countries that have some of the highest level as a percentage of GDP investment, both public and private, in their R&D, research, science, innovation systems. Now, of course, the metrics on what goes in doesn't always guarantee the output, but there's a strong correlation, obviously. But it's not just about funding, it's also about the frameworks, the ecosystems, the culture of innovation and collaboration, both within countries and across the different sort of triple helix, if you like, domains of government, business and research, but also internationally in collaboration. So what I think is clear is that we need to have a sort of change of approach and in Australia that helps drive that collaboration culture, and that we no longer have sort of the silos that we do in many respects between businesses who don't understand universities and vice versa, and but we develop collaborative pathways and incentives to driving that collaboration. We don't have in Australia anywhere near the percentage of business investment in research, science and innovation that there is in Europe. That should change as well. Just a general question, to address one of the questions that came up, and it gets to the nub, I think, of this, is what's the mechanism for the funding, the problem with the disconnect in being able to join with potential partners in Europe? And I'm afraid I can't give you the specific answer to that, but there are models, not many of them, but there are some models in Australia where Australian government have hypothecated or allocated particular funding mechanisms towards international collaboration. I think it comes from a sort of now decades old view that Australia public authorities shouldn't be about picking winners. That, you know, let industries and let businesses sort it out for themselves what they're good at and what they aren't. That, I think, has changed. I think there's been a change through COVID. I think the whole question of where are there areas of real expertise and capacity and topics, it will drive some of that change. Diversification in economic terms is certainly a buzzword now in Canberra, and Europe is a ready-made partner to be able to respond to that look to where are the partnerships and markets and industries where Australia needs to invest and build up capability. So I think you know, it's a good crisis in this respect to be able to ask some of those fundamental questions about where the future industries and sectors that Australia can excel at, where are the partners that Australia can work with to be able to deliver that, and part of that will also be to saying to government and getting government to say, well, look, rather than saying we've got two main pillars of funding, but we won't have any geographical sort of focus to those or whatever, seeing partnerships backed by appropriate resourcing to be able to get the collaboration to flow. So I'm sure there are mechanisms, but that's for people technically to work out how to do it. But that's clearly the answer, is to find those, to have those mechanisms to get the funding to flow.
Thank you very much, Jason. Yes, I think we can see you alluded to the importance of research and innovation as in the vaccines that we see now that offer a way out of the COVID-19 pandemic. If they deliver as they promise so far, they certainly are a benefit of investing in research and innovation. And I think whilst we don't have 3 years to come up with a solution, we're trying to do it a lot more quickly. You alluded to also the link between industry and researchers and universities, and certainly the model of the industrial PhD, or the co-tutelle, as they have in France, is I think a very productive and useful way of applying, not to ignore basic research, but also applying research to everyday problems. Look, I'll turn to Professor Peter Draper and his perspectives from the Institute for International Trade at the University of Adelaide, please.
Well, thanks, Jonas. Maybe I'll start by just agreeing with Anne on the challenges to research funding of Australian universities. I think this is a well-known issue, but the medium-term perspective is not particularly encouraging. Let's put it that way. By contrast, if I understand correctly, the amount of money is being allocated to Horizon Europe would triple the size of the Horizon package. So that tells you something about the relative priorities as currently framed. That's the environment within which we operate. On the cooperation side, I think the free trade agreement, when it comes into place, will build in a variety of institutional coordination and cooperation mechanisms, including related to research, and we should anticipate what some of those might be. It will create regular dialogue mechanisms between the Australian government and the European Commission, and beyond that, the member states. And so that's important for thinking about how to structure future conversations about funding collaborative research projects inter alia. And then finally, on collaboration with my colleagues, other centres, we're certainly very keen on that. I'm personally fairly new to this, but previously Professor Richard Pomfret, who I think everyone will know, has very actively collaborated with his colleagues across this space. And I look forward to continuing with that into the future and deepening it.
Oh, thank you. You mentioned also in your earlier intervention the work you did with the WTO and the European Union in presenting a path towards Horizon Europe. Engaged with Patrick Lamy, the former Director General of the World Trade Organization, who advocated that the European Union should spend at least 120 billion through the program on research, science and innovation, and also highlighted the role of entrepreneurship in translating science and research and innovation to the economy and economic and social benefits. You also mentioned the opportunity for dialogue, and I can say that through the high-level dialogue that takes place between the European Union and Australian institutions, we've had 3 of those sessions. In the margins of those, we're also having dialogue at a high level between regarding space and also the digital economy. So they are 2 areas of focus that are very important. I'll turn also now to Professor Bruce Wilson regarding the Centre for Excellence's perspective on, I heard he mentioned smart specialization, which is a favorite topic of mine. But if he might have his views on possible future synergies and perhaps the opportunity for synergy, strengthening that between Australia and European researchers. If we don't have Professor Bruce Wilson, I will just check. Excuse my finger pointing in your eyes.
No, my apologies, Jonas. I was still muted. That's a trap that we should all be well past by now. I was saying, let me pick up on your comment about smart specialisation, because this has been an interesting journey. Because our centre has had a focus on EU regional policy for a decade now, we've been very alert to the way in which smart specialisation has begun, initially from work undertaken by a Knowledge for Growth group, which was very much concerned with about the relative commercialisation of science in Europe compared with science in the US and Japan. Dominic Ferret, with other colleagues, led a working group on that from 2007. The EU's work coalesced with that of the OECD, and in that context took on very much a place-based context. And hence, as a policy initiative, the European Union introduced smart specialisation as a formal part of its attempt to connect science and industry from 2014 onwards, and that became an ex-ante conditionality for access to a significant portion of the cohesion funds, which are 1/3 of the EU's budget, quite apart from the investment in research and innovation through Horizon 2020. We've been actively promoting in Australia the benefits that we see from the smart specialisation process, and have had the opportunity to work on implementation of smart specialisation in Australia for the last 3 years. And what's interesting is that there is growing interest, particularly in my home state of Victoria, but also in Queensland, in Western Australia, in the Northern Territory. And so I think we can see quite an extent to which Australian stakeholders are looking for a more coherent and focused response to the challenges of disasters and other kinds of problems that exist outside the Australian metropolitan cities. So that is actually one very tangible and growing aspect of awareness about the European Union, about the significance of the investment it makes in regional policy, and about the particular approach that it adopts. But I think all of this pales, to be blunt, in comparison to the significance of the European Green Deal. And we'll all be alert to the problems that we have in Australia with a federal government that really struggles to get a coherent approach to dealing with the issues of climate action. But I think the election of a new president in the United States, who it seems will have much in common with the intent and the aspirations of the European Union, might well shift the goalposts quite quickly in Australia. And I personally think that's very much in Australia's interest to engage with the direction that's foreshadowed by the European Green Deal, that has implications not only for Australian business, but very much for Australian research only. Researchers as well, not only in relation to the STEM disciplines, but social and economic also.
I can certainly echo that, and in fact, we had the last Prime Minister but one, Malcolm Turnbull, launch a smart specialization event for his particular region, his particular electorate up in the Hunter. Not his electorate, but where he has strong roots. And three other ministers, in fact, Arthur Sinodinos, Christopher Pyne, and I think it was Senator Nash at that time, all echoed the value in approaching strategically not just industrial changes such as activities for the coal and steel industry, but looking at how science research and innovation can contribute to a future and educated workforce, what the investments are needed in infrastructure, and how industry in pivoting or translating, I won't dwell too much on the word pivot at this point, and translation into new and stronger growth and high well-paid jobs for the up-and-coming school leavers in those regions. Also in New South Wales, another couple of regions have picked up on smart specialization, and I believe that the group looking at Lithium Valley in Western Australia have also shown interest in the smart specialization method. Look, I see now that we've progressed through everybody in the panel a couple of times, and thank you. I would like to thank you for staying with us and joining with us